Check out the limited edition Pro X Superlight 2 in cyan over at logi.gg/Datto and use code Datto10 to save a little bit of cash on your next Logitech purchase. Dawn Chorus and Daybreak both received some buffs in the Renegades patch. Both of these things have been pretty irrelevant for a little while now. The last time I remember Dawn Chorus being relevant was when the hollowed layer was in the GM Nightfall rotation, which might as well have been 100 years ago. Daybreak was buffed by 20% in PvE, and projectiles now scorch targets. They baked a bunch of Dawn Chorus's effect into Daybreak by default, and now Dawn Chorus does the following. Daybreak projectiles deal more damage, your Scorch is improved, and you gain melee energy when you Scorch with a brief internal cooldown. So, let's break down these individual pieces first. How much is your super damage improved with Dawn Chorus? Actually, a very high amount. A normal Daybreak is going to get you about 6,000 damage on this boss in the shooting range on ultimate difficulty, while one with Dawn Chorus is pushing well over 10,000 damage. So, that's a good start. In terms of Scorch being improved, it's doing more damage per tick. It's not adding more stacks of Scorch to a target, which was a little disappointing, although the verbiage of your Scorch is improved could be made a little more descriptive by saying, you know, what it actually does instead of leaving it ambiguous, although we should be used to that by now. As for the melee energy, you can see here that I'm able to get my melee back in about 10 seconds with consistent Scorch ticks, so that part is pretty nice, although the application of this effect is something we'll discuss later. This all begs the question of, is this worth running? Is Dawn Chorus worth running? And in my opinion, the answer is maybe? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next. Alright, let's talk about my experience trying out some sort of a Dawn Chorus build. I'm going to go through the build portion a little bit quicker than I usually do, since this isn't necessarily a build that I'm in love with just yet. The setup that I ran was Hellion and Heat Rises. Hellion is because it's free Scorch on a pretty short cooldown on an ability that you're going to use very often. Outside of that, it's open. After some playtesting with both Praxic Blade and non-Praxic Blade setups, I really think you can pick whatever you want. I normally go Heat Rises because my muscle memory for Icarus Dash is terrible, and Heat Rises can get you some more melee energy if you're getting kills while you're in the air. Fragment-wise, I ran into some conundrums. I wanted to run full Scorch and Ignition on this setup, so like Singeing, Eruption, Char, and Ashes. I think there is some flexibility there, but if you want to be hitting those Scorches and Ignitions really hard, this is a good starting place. You will want Ember of Ashes almost regardless of what your setup is to proc Ignitions faster though. Praxic Blade can trigger an Ignition in 3 rapid swings with Ember of Ashes. However, we lose a lot of what makes Solar quite valuable. Radiant and Restoration. But in chasing Radiant and Restoration in this particular build, I think we lose some of the identity and potential power of the build. And let's face it, a lot of people go in the Radiant and Restoration direction anyway because it's very reliable, it's very good, and I want to do something that wasn't just, you know, melee gives you Radiant and your Radiant lasts longer and you can extend the duration of Radiant on kill and then a Fire Sprite gives you Restoration, like most people tend to do. On a non-Praxic Blade setup, losing Restoration and Radiant doesn't feel as bad because you can just sit back and play a little more defensively, but with Praxic, I do think having Radiant and or Resto is nice to have, but that comes with the sacrifice in the Scorch and Ignition part of the build. And even if you wanted to have Radiant without using Praxic Blade, I would understand that. You're probably going to want some form of Radiant for barrier champions anyway, so if you just left on something like Ember of Torches permanently, like, I get it. The artifact has no solar stuff built in at all, so we're kind of out of luck there. Grab every sword-based thing for Praxic Blade, and then grab all of the subclass agnostic options. Stats-wise, I pumped my super quite a lot since part of Dawn Chorus is that your super does a lot more damage. And with my setup, I was able to get supers pretty frequently. Maybe not Arc Warlock frequently, but often enough. And then I maxed out my melee regeneration stat to make sure that I had it as often as I could, although as we'll discuss, I'm a bit underwhelmed with Warlock melee in this setup. Class ability I wanted a good amount of, and even with singeing, I wasn't getting it as often as I wanted, so I will probably bump this stat up a little bit more. Weapons-wise, Praxic Blade in the kinetic slot with 2 incandescent and or burning ambition weapons to maximize your Scorch. Any sort of primary ammo heal clip incandescent weapons are going to be good here, although the easier the content, the more I would lean towards incandescent, and the more difficult the content, the more I would lean towards burning ambition. That being said, I think burning ambition is a bit on the weaker side right now. I would like to see it trigger a little bit sooner than it currently is. Armor mods aren't anything too crazy, just a very basic weapon-focused setup with some ability energy thrown in to supplement. Okay, so a few places I normally like to test in. Lawless Frontiers, Fireteam Ops, Solo Ops, usually at Ultimate difficulty because that's the main difficulty you will eventually play at, and because, you know, all builds work very well in easy content. I was trying to figure out how to put my conclusion of this build together after playtesting, and a friend of mine put it very succinctly. Your Scorch is either doing so much damage to enemies that it literally doesn't matter what build you're running, or your Scorch is doing so little to enemies that it feels really not that great to run this build. The point of this build is to spam ignitions, which I realize you need Scorch stacks for, but I'm not sure having an exotic to buff Scorch damage is that valuable right now, even if it does fulfill like an AoE damage over time like power fantasy. Without running Praxic Blade, you pretty much need to run with the ranged melee attacks, Celestial Fire. Snap melee, yes, is a guaranteed ignition if you land all of the bursts, but the danger that you need to put yourself in my opinion, not usually worth the risk in some of these higher level pieces of content. You need to already be in melee range, which means you need to be using something like Praxic Blade. I tried the 3-burst solar sidearm, but it's a primary weapon, and primary weapons tend to fall off pretty hard in stuff like Lawless Frontiers, which means you're not killing as quickly, which means you're taking more damage, which means you're going to die a lot more often. And if you're running with the full Scorch ignition setup that I mentioned earlier in the video, you have 0 defense, which would be fine. But the problem is that you are not rewarded enough for investing fully into this kind of setup. I know we're in a very high-powered offensive world right now, but a lot of that offense is supplemented with things like Devour or Woven Mail or Restoration at the same time. It's rare to not have some sort of a heal that procs when you do something nowadays, and you're going to notice that almost immediately if you start running this build. Ignitions are doing kind of weak damage, although they still take out, you know, some of the lower tier enemies without much issue. And there's not really a way to boost their potency outside of either triggering them more often or making the size of them larger. Like, there's no way to make them deal more damage. When it comes to the melee portion of Dawn Chorus, if you're on Praxic Blade, there's very little reason to swap off of your sword, snap melee for an ignition, and then go back to your sword when you can just swing your weapon 3 times and trigger an ignition yourself, on top of all of the other sword benefits in the artifact, which to me makes the boosted melee energy gains a bit of a waste with the Praxic Blade setup. The melee energy effect from Dawn Chorus feels like something that will be more beneficial during a season with a solar-based artifact where you might be able to access Restoration and or Radiant for free from the artifact. That's not to say that the build can't have some pop-off moments, because it absolutely does. It's not completely unusable. It feels great seeing so many ignitions popping off, but I think Praxic is somewhat necessary for this build right now, and you're not going to be running this build to do AoE Scorch damage. You're going to run it to spam ignitions, slice things with a sword, and have a really hard-hitting super. Which does beg the question, though, do you even really need Dawn Chorus right now? The super damage is great, but the other 2 effects in the current season have, I would say, questionable benefits. Could you run with, like, Eunoia and maybe just call it a day? Maybe. Moving to Fireteam Ops, Battleground Core, which is a way tougher activity than I think people realize, despite being target-rich, is covered in 1 gigantic Void Shield. That alone is going to slow you down significantly to the point where I don't think I would ever run this build in an activity that I knew had that many shielded enemies that weren't solar shields. It's also very easy to forget that you don't have the same starting health pool compared to Lawless Frontiers. And I know because I do this all the time, just flying into a group of enemies expecting to tank a bunch of damage, only to get annihilated immediately. You have to play at a bit of a slower, methodical pace. This is why I recommend the longer range melee. Something like Devil's Lair, on the other hand, which does have a fair amount of arc shields, did fare a bit better, though, as far as the experience went. Overload Pulse this season means Nullify from Salvation's Edge got some more use, and that is an excellent weapon for the setup. This is also a bit more solo-friendly than something like the Strand support build we recently discussed, since it's just all-out offensive power. You can just focus on trying to kill as many things as possible. That's kind of where I'm at with Dawn Chorus and these changes. It's a usable build, for sure, but it's also maybe one that I would keep in the back pocket until we get a more favorable artifact. If you're not a Praxic Blade enjoyer, you're going to have to go with a very different setup. And when I was using that particular setup, I'm not sure how much fun I was really having compared to some other builds that don't take nearly as much effort and might probably eclipse how much this build can really do. But feel free to talk about your own experiences and your own build variation in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.